afternoon, and welcome to our first Sabbath series with Pastor Darriell Hoy and Ms. Rebekah Bell Jackson. I'm Elder Dana Edmond, the Executive Director for the Office of Regional Conference Ministries, and we're so happy that you have joined us for our first Sabbath series. Before we have our opening prayer, I do want to acknowledge the loss of one of the iconic leaders of our church, Elder Charles E. Bradford, a mentor to me and to many other people, the first president of the North American Division, the first Black president as well. We certainly want to extend our condolences to his family, and we're grateful for his ministry and the privilege of having him in the lives of those of us who were privileged to know him. Let's bow our heads and ask God's blessing on our meeting today. Father, we thank you for this opportunity to discuss your business. We ask that we will do so with your guidance, your spirit, and we ask that in the name of your Son. Amen. Again, I want to introduce our co-host, Elder Darriell Hoy, Communications Director for the Office of Regional Conference Ministries and for the Regional Conference Retirement Program, and Ms. Rebekah Bell Jackson, a doctoral student at Howard University. Ladies, thank you very much for your presence.
Thank you. Welcome, Office for Regional Conference Ministries family. We're so excited that you're on our live stream today. We are doing our second series on examining the SDA church structure, and today we're talking about unions. And today's guest we have with us is Dr. Ron Smith. He's the esteemed president of the Southern Union. We also have with us Elder Dave Weigley, who is the president of Columbia Union, and we have sort of the new president on the block, Elder Carlos Craig, who is the president of the Southwestern Union. And so we want to welcome our guests and thank them for being here with us today.
Thank you all so much for coming. So we are going to start with Elder Craig. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you so much. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit about your journey that led you to union leadership?
Well, it was a long journey, and I'm very grateful for the journey that God sent me on. When I graduated from college, I went to the office of the president of the Texas Conference, and I asked for a job, and he looked at me. He said, "Young man, you will never work in this conference. You will never work in the ministry." The way I looked at that time, I wouldn't have hired myself either. I was just a mess at that time. But God has taken me on a journey. Had the privilege of being a 7th and 8th grade school teacher. Had the privilege of being an associate evangelist. Had the privilege of being a youth director, of being a vice president for evangelism and Hispanic ministries. I was a conference secretary for 1 year. That's all I could take of a conference secretary. Policies are not my thing. But then conference president for 10 years, and now 4.5 months as union president. But I praise God for every step.
Thank you for sharing. Dr. Weigley, do you mind telling us a little bit about what led you to union leadership?
Yeah, thank you, Becca, and it's good to be with you here today. I am just overjoyed for God's goodness in my life. I was raised in a family of 7 children, the youngest of 7, educated through our Christian schools. And somewhere God touched me on the shoulder and said, I'd come to ministry, and I fought it for a while. Entered ministry, began pastoring, did evangelism, and then years ago, reflecting on that, about almost 40 years ago, I became a conference evangelist. And then I'd become a conference ministerial director and a conference secretary. And then was blessed with being able to help lead 2 different conferences as a conference president, one in Washington Conference, which is one of the prettiest conferences in North America. saying up there is, when you leave it, you've been at the best, endure the rest. And that's Western Washington. That's not Eastern Washington. The beautiful mountains, Olympic Peninsula, all that, Mount Rainier. Went to Potomac Conference and thought I'd stay there another wonderful 14 or so years. But in 2006, the Lord invited me to step into a position that Dr. Harold Lee retired from and become the president here in the great Columbia Union. Born here in this union, child of this union, and it's been an unbelievable journey that I have been blessed with being a privilege of being a part of this. And thank you for the question, and thanks for this meeting.
Well, thank you for joining us. Dr. Smith, same question. Tell us a little bit about how you made your journey to union leadership.
Thank you very much. I just want to appreciate each of the esteemed hosts and my colleagues that we have the opportunity today to share together. My dear friend, Elder Carlos Craig, and I need to say Dr. Dave Weigley. I need to emphasize Dr. Dave Weigley. This may not be a response to the question you asked me. He is a bona fide PhD and an MBA. He's a very qualified gentleman and a scholar. And I'd be remiss if I didn't seize the opportunity to at least affirm the reality of that. Thank you, Dr. Weigley, for sharing. I was born and bred and reared in New York City, most particularly Brooklyn, New York. And I sojourned there, began my ministry as a result of being a graduate of Oakwood University in the regional conferences. I started as a pastor and worked for 15 beautiful years in the Northeastern Conference. It was there that I engaged in a whole lot of evangelism, getting some feedback. Are you all getting feedback? Don't know what that is. But anyway, somebody might need to turn their mute on or something. Mute off. However, mute on. But basically, I was called probably at the end of 1999 at the behest of this body, of the Office of Regional Conference Ministry, then called Black Caucus or Regional Caucus or whatever we may have named it then. To serve as the editor of Message Magazine. And while there, also serving with Elder Ted Wilson as the vice president of the Review and Herald. I did that for 8 years. And on the conclusion of that, I transitioned to the Southern Union to serve as executive secretary. And for the past 10 years, I'm in my 10th year now, concluding the 10th year this month, I've been serving as president of the Southern Union. Had no plans to be here. I planned to be in a small church somewhere in the valley. But the Lord led me here, unbeknownst to me. I got here, and I'm happy to serve as a union president for the Southern Union now.
Thank you so much. Elder Craig, we will pose the next question to you. So we are here to talk about unions, but what are unions in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and what is the function of a union?
I got to turn that mute off now. Carlos, can't hear you.
There, I was trying to help my good friend Dr. Smith, and I just kept muting myself. I feel like I am the least qualified to answer this. My two colleagues have been doing it for so much longer than I have, but my short 4.5 months as union president here have taught me that the union plays a vital role as a in-between entity that, when I was a pastor, when I was at the conference, I used to say, what do those guys at the union do? I bet they sit there with their feet up on the desk. They don't do much. But I have learned the hard way here in 4.5 months that I sit on 28 committees. And so I think that the role of being an advisor to the conferences is probably one of the biggest roles. Another thing is that you serve as a person who brings the interests of your local conferences within your union to these committees and to these entities. And so I'm still learning the ropes, but I would say that I explain to people it's much like a parent to adult children. Your adult children, they do what they want to do, but you serve as an advisor to them, and you try to help them and steer them along the way. That's what I see it as.
May I please augment without wasting time? I'm certain that at some juncture of this series, you all looked at conferences and conferences operate academies. And it's important to note that unions operate colleges and universities. That's why I have this concept in mind that every entity of the church works in synchrony and synergy, and we kind of do things together. Unions operate revolving funds, and that's probably one of the greatest contributors to local churches and conferences in terms of functionality. In terms of having an educational system, the official organ of unions, meaning the official magazine. And the Southern Union, we call it the Southern Tidings. In Dr. Weigley's union, they call it the Visitor, Columbia Union Visitor. Obviously, that's a responsibility too, coordinating publishing as well as internet technologies, and in a larger, more distant dimension, evangelism. So I just wanted to augment the responsible answer that Craig has given and just share that aspect as well.
We've kind of talked about the relationship between the conference and the union. Some of our members tend to think that the union has a kind of prescriptive role with the conference. In other words, the union has the ability to direct the conference in a prescriptive way. I remember, Dr. Smith, when I worked with you in the Southern Union, there was a particular constituent that didn't like something I did, and they contacted you, and they were under the impression that the union has a prescriptive role. Dr. Elder Craig talked about that a little bit, but kind of, and if you can explain it in as simple manner as possible. I'm a former church school teacher, so explain it so that my former 7th and 8th grade class can understand what is the relationship between the union and the conference, and then the union and the division. And Dr. Weigley, we will ask you if you'll take a stab at that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Edmonds. You know, it's very interesting. You're exactly right. Many people believe, and even there are people who work in different levels of the church who believe the union is a supervisor of the conference. They are not. We are separate entities. One time a guy asked me, "So who's your boss?" I was a conference president. And he was wondering, who was your boss? I said, 28 people in a room. You know, do what we can to bring the leadership development to you. Also, we are there to, the relationship between the union and a conference. We come in as union presidents, and we chair nominating committees to help choose a new president when you have, a vacancy, or when you have a session. A nominating committee meets to consider the incumbents and anyone else that might be considered for president. And that role is we're not there to tell them what to do. We're there to facilitate conversation to try to determine what God's will is. We are there to be a type of independent body to facilitate furthering a mission based upon how God is guiding the local conference. And the union has responsibility too to bring their counsel to play in that kind of conversation. But we are not, we are not the boss of the conferences, and the division is not the boss of the union. We need to understand that each local conference has a constituency. The union has a constituency. The GC has a constituency, but they are not considered quite the constituency like a local union because it's the world field. And so as people in the General Conference will say, the union is the first constituent body of believers, and they are a separate entity. I could go down the road on this a lot of ways but for time's sake, I won't go too far except to say the tragedy in the Southern Union when they lost 5 leaders in Georgia Cumberland in a plane crash. It really became apparent we were separate entities when lawsuits were brought against the Southern Union saying you were neglectful and not holding Georgia Cumberland accountable to take care of certain maintenance issues. And it was shown in court that no, the Southern Union does not tell the Georgia Cumberland what to do. We are separate entities. And that to me was very helpful. That was 2004, that tragedy, as you recall. I don't know if that helps you. That the relationship is, it's supportive, it's intertwined. It's a tender relationship that we have, an agreement. We're together in mission, and we at the union are kind of like when you you rent something from the rental shop that has a motor and there's a governor on it. The governor doesn't let it run too fast. The governor governs. Unions are governors that assist the conferences, but we are not their supervisors.
Augmenting the comment of Dr. Weigley, and to respond to Elder Edmond, a union is not prescriptive. And Elder Edmond, you did serve while we were there in the union together as the president of South Central Conference. You know that part of my nomenclature perpetually was non-prescriptive relationship with all entities of the church. And I really believe in that wholeheartedly. I try not to look at the organization of the church in a hierarchical way, but more of a concentrical way. Rather than higher and lower, I like to say wider and narrower. So we are all corresponding with one another. We all have separate roles. And I like the idea of the union being a supporter and in many cases an advisor when and only when requested.
Well, thank you, Dr. Smith. I'm not sure my 7th and 8th grade class would have understood concentric and hierarchy.
Circular and high and low.
Okay. All right. Dr. Smith sometimes tends to talk in the manner of someone who has 2 terminal degrees, which he does have. But I get the higher and lower. So thank you very much. And by the way, I need to share with our audience, Dr. Smith may have to slip away towards the end. He consented to be with us, even though he has a conflicting appointment at the very end. So if you see him leave away, he didn't get raptured. He just has to slip away. And Dr. Smith, thank you for agreeing to be with us for most of this meeting. All right. If I'll direct this to you, Elder Craig. I went to my local church today, and I worshiped with my local church. We were properly masked and social distance and all that sort of thing. If I'm not Elder Edmond church administrator, but I'm Dana Edmond, local church member, and I said to you, Elder Craig, what benefit does my local church derive from having a union? How would you answer that? What difference and what benefit does having a union have to that person in the pew in a local church? Okay, you got to unmute again, Elder Craig.
Okay, I have Dr. Smith, my good friend, to blame. I keep muting myself here. I was going to say that I will give you 2 answers. One is brutally honest, and the second one is the answer that I'm working on as I work here at the union. The brutally honest answer is I don't know what benefit the union is to the local church. And it's kind of like our local churches in the community. Many of our churches, I don't know what the percentage may be, 70, 80%. If they were to disappear tomorrow, most of our churches, there would be no one that missed them in the communities. And I think that kind of runs along with our conference, with the union, with the division. Unfortunately, we have not found ways to impact the communities around us or the organizations that we work with in the way that we should. And I think that's one of the great challenges. Some of my close friends reminded me when I left the conference and came to the union, now you always complained about the union. Now you figure it out and get it straight. So we'll be working on that. The other answer is that I believe that the union is a significant contributor to the church as a whole, whether it be local church, whether it be the conference, whether it be our sister organization, division above us. Because as was mentioned, Dr. Weigley mentioned this, and I gave him a call early on, and that stuck with me, Dave, what you said, that the union is like a governor in the sense that it kind of gauges and governs and is the conscience, so to speak, of the conferences and the churches. And so our conferences are like our children, and the churches and schools are like our grandchildren. And those of us who have grandchildren understand that there's nothing like our grandchildren, and the union has a chance to go in and baby and pamper those churches and schools, whereas the conference can't always do that. And I've learned that early on, that whenever I go to a church, whenever I visit a school now as a union leader, I can just love on them and pamper them. Whereas as a conference president, I had to come in with tough messages sometimes. So that's one of the benefits, great benefits that I see from the union to the local church.
Okay, let me direct that to the two other union presidents, because I want to believe that there is a benefit to, and maybe I'm living in Disneyland, but I want to believe there is a benefit to the local church for that the union provides to the local church. We recognize the benefit to a conference, but to the local church, is there a direct benefit, or is the work of a union primarily to interact with the local conference and the division? Is there
Good
a
question.
role for the union on the local for the local church? Yeah, go ahead. Then okay. Let me go to Dr. Smith, and I'll come back to you, Dr.
Sure.
Okay, I concur with the sentiment of what Elder Craig has said. I think he's on target, but I also want to mention that the union has a unique opportunity to engage in direct input, communicative direct input at every level of the church, to policy as well as polity. I don't think there's any other level of the church that can do that. The union is tangential to virtually every level of our organization. If we were to specifically ask what benefit is the union to the church, to the local church, I would have to begin by responding and suggesting that unions would represent, in this particular case, the lowest hanging fruit beyond the conference. So it's very easy to ask what the relationship of the union is to the church. Well, obviously, the union benefits the church because the union speaks to every level of the organization. And as I just mentioned, I'll just drop my iPad here. As I just mentioned, we are, we have direct input on the communication frontier, direct input to every level of the church along the path of policy and polity. Meaning we speak, I want to speak to the 7th graders and the 6th graders, Elder Edmond, when I say policy and polity, the processes by which we are governed, those policies, as well as the polity, how one level of the church organization speaks to the other. The union is very tangential in speaking truth to the powerful dimensions of our church, as well as the most granular dimensions of our church. And from that standpoint, I think there's a relationship generally with the organization, and the church benefits from that as well, by virtue of being a direct policy and polity speaker. But in a more specific sense, I think the union is a benefit to the church through at least one example, the revolving fund. The revolving fund. Now, obviously, churches, as they seek to enhance themselves on a capital frontier, to build their organizations and to renovate and to purchase and to close on properties, they don't have the resources readily. The revolving fund, obviously, at the behest of the executive committee, but pretty much requested by the local church, taps the union for those resources, and the union makes those resources available through the revolving fund. That's a benefit to the local church. But I do want to say, in a more global sense, that the union speaks like no other level of our organization in direct communicative ways to every level of the church along the paths of polity and policy.
All right, Dr. Weigley, take a shot at that.
Well, Dr. Smith stole some of my thunder about the CURF, the revolving fund. We call it the Columbia Revolving Fund. Did your church buy a school? Did they build a new building? Did they take a loan out? That loan was easier to get because, at least in the Columbia Union, we have a fund over $200 million. That loan was easier to obtain because you didn't have to go through a business type loan. The Columbia Revolving Fund provided that loan to help buy that church. So the union stepped up there. Do you have a school at your church? If you have a school or you're a constituent member of the school, how do you know that education in your school is accredited? The union will make sure that school is accredited. And so you're providing excellent quality education. When you gave your tithe dollar, how do you know if your tithe dollar was spent the way that the brethren told you it did? Because the union is sure that there's an auditing service that comes to the conference, and when we have a session, the union will make sure the audit report is given. Did you ordain a local elder in your church, woman or male? You can be sure that the union somewhere weighed in on that at an annual council to talk about local elders. The union basically provides a protection of the mission of the church in the local context of its region. And that is huge when it comes down to the expression of mission.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I can think of one additional one that Dr. Smith made me think of when he first mentioned the revolving fund. I remember when I was in South Central, a portion of a large portion of the evangelistic funds came from the higher organizations, one of which was the union. And so the union passed down the funds to the conference, and the conference passed them down to the local church.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing about the purpose and of unions. What we want to ask, members are faithful in returning tithe, and they give a generous offering, and part of their tithe goes to the union. Elder Weigley, would you talk to us about what part goes to the union and how your union uses the tithe dollars from members?
You see my fingers, that you can't, where's the camera? There it is. 9%. So 9 cents of your tithe dollar will end at the Columbia Union. Rebekah, you're here in the great Columbia Union at Howard University studying to be a doctor. And when you finish your doctor, you'll know why you like to be called doctor, because you spent your blood, sweat, and tears getting that doctorate, right, Dr. Ron? And Dr. Craig. Listen, the monies that you'll be a doctor, honorary doctor, when you spend a couple more years as union president. When you give your money to the union here in the Columbia Union, as a breakdown, we received $141 million of tithe. Of the $141 million of tithe, $12 million stayed at the union. Now, we at the union didn't keep it for our resources. Rather, we paid for auditing. We talked about that a moment ago. We helped to pay the conference, some of the conference auditing. We dealt also with appropriation to our great university, Washington Adventist University, where we will give each year of our tithe, we will give over $1 million to our university. They get $4 million, counting what all the conferences give. We will give money to the retirement. We have a number of people in the old system going through, we call it the tail, where you have people that are getting older and pass through the system. We have to pay about 14% into retirement. We also give appropriations to conferences during the pandemic. This is one of the backstops the unions have. Another purpose we have. If a conference gets in challenges, troubles, finances, that they have a hard time, we are there to assist them financially, because we have a good reserve. We're not as great as the great Columbia Union Reserve. They're the greatest reserve in all of the division, but they're the wealthiest union and largest union. Nonetheless, those reserves help us.
The Columbia Union is the wealthiest union, Dave?
You are the wealthiest Southern Union.
I'm not Columbia Union, sir.
Okay, no. We gave $4 million out during the pandemic to help our conferences. We had one conference that had a huge loss in tithe last year. Now they're back. God is blessing our field, but we're there to provide that kind of assistance when a conference gets in hard times. And also we give 10% of what we give, what we receive, excuse me, it goes upstairs to, Ron says it's not upstairs. It's at centrifugal. What do you call it, Ron? That or whatever. It goes to the other organizations, the General Conference, the division, etc. And then we actually have a special reversion that goes back to our churches for different projects, for building projects. We keep about 30% of the money. Now that 12 million, we keep 30% for our operations. And that would take care of our legal services, educational services, IT that we provide. It's old saying that strong help the weak. You have some conferences that are mega conferences that produce a lot of tithe, like the large churches in the DC, Philadelphia region. That tithe gets out to the smaller fields thanks to the union and the way we are organized. I could go on, but that's some of what we do with the dollars we receive.
May I take a stab at it, Elder Edmond? Or who asked the question? Okay, I think yes, Pastor. If I can take a stab at this.
Sure.
When all the dust settles, okay, of course we know, as was mentioned, 9% goes to the union of the tithe dollar from the church, and 14.5% goes to the General Conference and the North American Division. Okay, now we all know that in the organization of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, money it just kind of like ebbs and flows. It goes up and it comes down, and it goes up and it comes down. It goes up and it comes down. When all the dust settles, one of my favorite conversation persons is Elder Randy Robinson, the treasurer of the North American Division. He and I spend a lot of time together, and we talk, and we're dear friends. He kind of shared and helped me to understand some of these numbers. Okay, of this 24.5% of tithe money, that is given 9% to the union, 14.5% to the division and the General Conference. It goes up and down. Here's the point. When all the dust settles, approximately the General Conference winds up with 2%. The North American Division winds up with 2%. And the unions wind up with 3 to 4%. Once all appropriations are made, it's important to note that the tithe dollar that gets ascribed to the union and higher organizations, the money in the church pretty much goes to three main buckets. Okay, education. I'm talking about pre-K through 16. Education. It goes to evangelism, and it goes to capital. Those are the three areas. Of course, there are a battery of other issues like retirement and auditing and a whole lot of other stuff. But those are the three main buckets. But when all the dust settles, the General Conference winds up with about 2% of the tithe dollar. When all the dust settles, the North American Division winds up with 2%. And the union winds up with 3 to 4%. In this particular case, because the Southern Union is our largest union and our most financially endowed union, we wind up with 4%. And I just want to be real clear that we lean heavily on subsidies. When I think of education, think of this. Think not only of K through 16, but think of the MDiv, the Master of Divinity. Every time there's a pastor in the pulpit, 8 to 9 times out of 10, the organization has had to pay educationally to have that pastor to be there. So we're talking about Masters of Divinities, and we're talking about Doctor of Ministries. Okay, those get paid for vigorously by the tithe dollar. And that's what I mean when I say the ebb and flow. It is hard to really recognize and to track the dollar when we have so many arteries and so many vessels and so many veins that need to be cared for. But when all the dust settles, this is what the money looks like. 2% GC, 2% North American Division, and 3 to 4% union.
Dr. Smith, I really appreciate you and Dr. Weigley sharing that. Is very educational. I think most people don't know the percentage and what it's used for. So that's very educational. Before I ask the next question to you, Elder Craig, what I'd like to do is invite our audience, our viewing family, if you have questions that you'd like us to ask, to go ahead and write those in the chat, either on Facebook or on YouTube, so that we can have the questions that you would like to have answered. Our next question, and I'm gonna throw it at you, Elder Craig. And you kind of were brutally honest earlier, but this question is worded a little differently. People ask, are unions really necessary? How would you respond to that question?
Yeah, I would say that in my short tenure here at 4.5 months, that I wasn't so sure about that in the past, but I would say now, honestly, I think that the union does play a vital role in the sense that the influence in carrying the needs, the perspectives, and the interests of the local conferences and churches and schools throughout the division with the different sister entities. We play a role of carrying news and bringing back news, carrying interest and bringing back interest. That communication, vital communication between sister entities, I think the union carries a large role in that. And so I can certainly understand, because I've asked the question myself, are unions necessary? I would say, they're just as necessary as conferences. They're just as necessary as divisions. I almost get myself in trouble here of late because I turn that question when I've been asked that, is the union necessary? I say, well, before you ask if the union is necessary, ask if the division is necessary, because they've been out of their building for 18 months and no one noticed. So never mind. I won't go any further than that.
Oh, may I take a stab at that as well, just to make sure we gloss it properly?
Briefly, yes, but briefly.
But I can pass. I'll pass. I think Elder Craig. Thank you.
Well, Pastor Hoy, if I could jump in, I do want Dr. Smith to respond, because that's the question that I hear most often directed at you.
I'll jump in too.
Yeah. So now we need you to jump quick. We need both of you to jump quickly. But
okay.
That's one of the reasons why we had this program, because that is a question that gets asked a lot.
There is no layer of our organization. There is no layer of our church that is more poised to speak truth to power as the union. The union basically emanates from where it is to every artery, every vein, every vessel, every capillary, to communicate the issues that go on in the church. If you look at it very carefully, a union president, for all practical purposes, touches every dimension of the church organization. That is not the case with other levels. And that communication happens when we have to speak to issues like policy and politics.
Okay, go ahead, Dr. Weigley.
Thank you. I'm gonna piggyback on what Elder Craig said and Dr. Ron here. When I was a young worker, I wondered why we had unions, and I said, I don't think we need unions. And we always wonder why we need the organization ahead of us. I wonder sometimes why we need divisions. I get that. And then churches wonder why sometimes we have conferences. The union's function, 1901 reorganization, was to, number one, express mission in local context, and number two, to protect from intervention in kingly power from the higher ups, of trying to define the mission and expression of the mission in the church locally. We are a Catholic church. We're not the Roman Catholic Church. We're Catholic, as you know, the word Catholic is universal. The Roman Catholic Church is very hierarchical. It at the top tells you, put on a mask. You don't put a mask on, you can't step inside the church, whatever. That's a hierarchical organization. The hierarchical church says, you can't do this, you can't do that. When you come to the organization Ellen White envisioned in 1901, it was that the unions, when they brought unions in, borrowed from Australia, they said, hey, there's a lot of value because they're a local constituent where the local people can express how to do mission in their context. Unions are necessary if they step up and express local context. If they don't, then unions aren't necessary. Just go ahead and rubber stamp what you're given from the top.
Thank you. Elder Craig, I'm going to pose this question to you because you said you've only been doing this 4.5 months. And so I think that you would be the best person to answer. What does your day look like? I figure it's changed a lot since you took this position. So can you tell us what your day-to-day responsibilities look like and what a typical day for you looks like as a union president?
Yeah, and I'll preface that answer by saying I am enjoying immensely being a union president as opposed to a conference president, because when you don't have to fire people and you don't have to deal with angry churches, it lifts a big burden off of you. And so I can actually sleep at night now. So it's a good thing. But a union president, from my perspective and short time I've been doing it, as I mentioned before, I sit on a ungodly amount of committees, 28 committees. And I'm just thankful right now I don't have to travel to those because of COVID. But I can only imagine when travel heats up again, that's going to be a challenge to be on 28 committees. So there's a lot of committee work. I mentioned the work of advising our conference presidents. I get a call from one or two of my conference presidents every day asking about something. And usually, you know how I mentioned the adult children, and parenting adult children. Usually the conference presidents call the union president just so they can say they call the union president if something goes wrong, So that we do a lot of that. We do a lot of strategizing as far as how to get the gospel preached more efficiently, more effectively, more quickly in our union territory. And the third thing that I think we do a lot of is trying to strengthen the weaker areas of the union. In our case right now, Louisiana is a very weakened area, and we're just meeting every day thinking about how not only to respond to the hurricane, but how do we move the gospel, the preaching of the gospel forward in Louisiana. I have had a burden on my heart for New Orleans for a long time. I just feel like so much more can be done there. And now that I'm at the union, I feel like a big part of my time is spent talking to those pastors down there, going down there as much as I can, and beefing up the evangelism effort in those areas.
Let me follow up before I go to my next question with the two doctors. Elder Craig mentioned the zillions of committees that all administrators sit on. That's one of the challenges that some of our lay people have. Too many committees, a waste of time. Give me a couple of committees that both you serve on are just vital to mission. Start off with you, Dr. Weigley. Give us an example of 2 or 3 committees that you sit on that are vital to mission.
Did you say me, Dan?
Yes,
Dan?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, I think what we need to understand is first, of course, the union executive committee, where all the conferences come in, and they provide initiatives they need to have us look at. We support. There's certain responsibility given only to the union. As you may know, as ordination is one of them. So we provide opportunity to recognize people who are called to ministry. A committee I sit on that's also very important is the committees of our university. I chair the University Board of Trustees. We also have 2 health systems here in the Columbia Union. One Adventist Healthcare, which has a legacy hospital, used to be in Tacoma Park. I chair the systems board for the health system here in Maryland. Also, we have the Kettering Health System, has a number of hospitals, our larger of the 2 systems, providing guidance, providing board leadership in those. And then there's the annual council, the General Conference Executive Committee, where I represent nearly 150,000 members to try to express our understanding of how to do mission, et cetera, and to give our input into the process.
Are there any committees? Because I know, Dr. Smith, you serve on those same committees. Are there any committees that you can tell our constituents about that Dr. Weigley didn't mention that are vital to mission, or did he take all the vital ones?
Okay, my experience is that virtually every committee that I'm on is vital. The individuals who complain to say we do too many committees are often individuals who don't understand this type of work. Because if they had a committee and they were seeking to do some ministry initiative and I did not support their committee once someone are asked to participate, they would be highly offended. So I kind of take that in one ear and it goes out of the other in terms of, too many committees. We need to do more boots on the ground. I am very interested in boots on the ground. My day is committee driven, yes. Pretty much every day I have committees, and every committee I consider an important one. That includes Advent Health, where I serve as board chair. That includes a Southern Adventist University, where I serve as board chair. Oakwood University, where I serve as vice chair. And alongside of that, I have my own organization that's grown out of the union because we're into growth. I have an evangelistic initiative called A System for Survival. Now, we have a committee now that we govern. We just finished a campaign and we baptized 118 people. Our union has grown to 313,000 members. And we're continuing to grow because we're placing an emphasis through committee drivenness. We're seeking to foster and bolster evangelism to a higher level. So I'm just one of those. I don't like meetings, but I see each committee I'm on, I see as absolutely necessary. We've got 8 conferences. Every conference has a committee. That's important. We have universities. Every university has a board. That's important. We've got a health system. That's important. And we have auxiliary. They're all important. And miss it, and people will whine, they will complain, they will belly ache because you're not adhering to what's important to them. So committees are valuable and needed in the church.
All right, let's look futuristically. I'm talking like my friend Dr. Smith now. I'm not using my 7th and 8th grade language. Let's talk futuristically. What? And again, I'll start with you, Dr. Weigley. What? Looking down the road, what would you like to do in your union that hasn't been done yet? And I'll pose that to all 3 of you in this order. We'll start with you, Dr. Weigley, and then we'll go to Elder Craig, and then we'll close with you. What's out there? What frontier is out there to be conquered? Give me one thing.
Yeah. You asked me in the wrong year. You asking me in 2021. You asked me in 2012, and I will tell you, I'd like to ordain women. That's what I will tell you right up front. That's the dream that we had. That's the dream we still have, to see. But really, I'll tell you, if we could move the needle from the separation of clergy and laity and realize we are all one. There is no hierarchy in the church. We are all one in the body of Christ. We all have our different gifts and roles and responsibilities, but we need to realize that the mission is not done by the preacher, it's done by the member, and I'd like to move more in that direction, to get more people engaged in experiencing the mission.
Okay, Elder Craig, same question. Okay, we need you to unmute again.
Yeah, Dr. Smith has me all flustered here. So we just rolled out a new strategic plan for the Southwestern Union. It has 8 key points, but I'll just focus on 3 right now. The number one thing is soul winning, as always. Dr. Smith just mentioned the 300,000+ in Southern Union. We'd like to put a dent in that. We're only at about 120,000 at the moment, but we have challenged all of our pastors throughout the union next year, 2022, to baptize 10% of their membership. And we feel like if we can get that done, it's really going to go a long way as far as preaching the gospel in the Southwestern Union. The other, number 2, is we'd like to grow young in this union. And we did that in Texas. When I got to Texas 21 years ago, you were hard pressed to find anyone under 50 in the ministry. And today, if you look at the ministerial force in Texas, you'll see that it's about 60% under age 45 now. And that's something that's possible. When you grow your pastors young, you grow your congregations young as well. And so that's a big initiative. And the third thing is bolstering Adventist education. I'll go back to Texas because that's my reference point here for the last 10 years. Unfortunately, we lost 10 schools in the Texas Conference in the past 20 years. One school that you lose is too many. So not only how do we increase the enrollment in our schools, how do we protect our schools so that we're not losing schools for lack of enrollment and things like that. So those 3 initiatives are very important and things that we'd like to get done in the next 5 years.
Okay, Dr. Smith, Elder Craig gave me 3. I need one from you. What? Give me one futuristically. And I'm sounding like you. Futuristically, what?
Okay, I'm in the throes of an initiative that we're calling Reconnection. And my dream is to increase our membership in the next 5 years, to double our membership. If we're 313, I want to be 626. But if the Lord delays us coming by next year this time, and I want to do it not necessarily through what I just completed, an evangelistic meeting. It's exciting to baptize 118 people. I feel really good about that, but that's not how it's going to get done. We have a process that's called reconnection. And through reconnection, if we could replicate, if every member just finds a person to pull back that has strayed from the church, because our retention level is something that we're really praying about. You know, people come in, but they leave. If we can identify those who have left, to try to hug them and figure out why they left, I think it's a mission accomplished. If each member can reclaim a person according to the prodigal motif, if we could just claim a person, bring a person back, that's the process that we call reconnection. That's my goal.
So a lot of you have talked about some changes you want to see. So this next question is about change at the union level. How does change happen? What does that process look like? And I will pose that to Dr. Weigley. How do you create change from a union level?
Sure, that's great. It's great. You know, a book came out a few years ago called The Leadership Challenge. It's like in its 6th or 7th edition by 2 professors out in Santa Clara, California. It's called The Leadership Challenge, and it talks about challenging the status quo. I believe what we do here at our union, and we've done it over the last 15 years, is we have a process of visioning the future. And it's in now. We just came through a session. And so we will listen to our constituents through surveys. We'll bring that into the executive committee of the union. We'll look at it, listen, talk about it. Sometimes there are things that I think are God things that just trip you and say, hey, look at this, and you've got to take a quick look. And so then, like we did back in 2011-12, the journey to women's ordination in the Columbia Union happened. That change happened through ad hoc committees, examining, looking at things, listening, praying, talking to lots of people, and looking closely at the Word of God. And then introducing change back to the executive committee from the findings we did. So it's a lot of listening, praying, going to the mountain. You listen, go to the mountain yourself as a leader, but you're listening to the people. Somebody once said that an effective administrator spends 70% of his time, her time, in listening. So that it's a big part of what you do. And then you begin to craft that change based upon the values and actually vision people have. And you arrive at hopefully an anointed vision that God lays a burden on leaders and on the members as they move forward. But that's the process we've found effective here.
Well, I want to go to some questions from our viewers. I'm going to ask 2 questions from viewers. The first one I'm going to ask you, Dr. Smith. This is from viewer Lorena Bronx. She said, I just read an article from the Washington Post from 1979 when Elder Bradford was just elected as NAD president. It noted the fact that there was a desire to create Black unions to help Black people get representation and leadership in ways they wouldn't otherwise. Now it's 2021 and there aren't Black unions. Do you think regional conferences adequately filled that role that was once intended for the vision of Black unions? And the second part of the question says, and it's going off my screen, so let me see if I can get it on my phone. Well, we'll start there and then I'll ask the second. Do you think regional conferences adequately filled that role that was once intended for the vision for Black unions?
I'm not really certain I'm the most qualified to answer that, but I do know that there was a clamor. I was a young minister. I was an intern when there was a clamor for Black unions. We had solidarity amongst all of our regional conference presidents. A different slate of presidents then, obviously. They marched, they gave speeches. Out of that journey came something called 16 points, okay? And I'm not gonna take time with that. But out of the 16 points came a commitment to foster higher levels of diversity at every station of our operation. So that's why we, in most of our unions and most of our institutions, we see, we don't see 3 black officers. We don't see 3 white officers. We usually see a mixed multitude. And I believe that the regional caucus, the slate of regional conference presidents now, and I kudos to Elder Edmond for being a visionary. They have a very pivotal role to play in fostering the realization of what I believe Elder Bradford had in mind. The same Elder Bradford who made that wonderful statement in surrounding the drive for union presidents. When we were driving, at least in my caucus, he came and he told us to back off. Stop the drive, he declared, for black unions, and let's study how we can collaborate and be a part of the already existing unions. So, that was the outcome of that conversation. So that article is reflective of a piece of that history, but not all of that history.
All right, thank you so much. Elder Craig, do you think that the representation of Black people within church leadership is where it should be now?
Well, I'll reflect the words of my dear friend, Dr. Smith there. I don't know if I'm the most qualified to answer that as well, but I think that just from an observation of what I see in leadership throughout the church here, I am very encouraged and very satisfied with the representation that I see of minorities in general in leadership positions in the North American division. We're like the old Virginia Slims commercial. We've come a long way. And I believe that we are seeing a great diversity of leadership. The reason I said I don't feel like I'm the most qualified, when I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and my parents taught me to not look at skin color, to not look at background, to not look at ethnicity, but to look at professionalism and to look at who performs well and does the best job for the church in general. And I think that is actually the plague that we're facing today, not diversity. I think we've come a long way in that. The plague that we're facing today is a plague of mediocrity across the board in ministry and in leadership. And I think that's the one that has to be addressed today because we're a church, we're afraid to address these issues of mediocrity and lack of performance. And once we put on our big boy pants and address these things, I think we'll see the church take off in a way we've never seen it take off before.
Okay. Elder Edmond, were you adding to what was being said?
Thank you, Pastor Hoy. Actually, the Office of Regional Conference Ministries performs a number of the things that unions do. For example, all 3 of you gentlemen operate a union magazine, the Columbia Visitor, the Southern Tidings, and Elder Craig, I forget.
Reporter.
Yes. The ORCM does the regional voice, right? Just like the conferences contribute a portion of their tithe to the unions, the regional conferences also give a portion of their tithe to the regional conference retirement plan and the Office for Regional Ministries. We subsidize the Message magazine. We subsidize PELC, which is a union function. We have United Youth Congress, which is subsidized by our office, which is a division function. And so a number of the things that unions do, the Office of Regional Conference Ministries has the privilege of doing. And right now, we are building an office that will house all of our ministries. And that's similar to, just like you all have a union office, we will have a office in Huntsville. So that's the first thing that's changed. The second and final thing that's changed is because of the 16 points, which said every union, there needs to be a person of color on the administrative level. Well, until Dr. Graham retired, and until and Elder Valentine went to the division, 4 of the 9 unions were led by African Americans, including the 2 largest. So those 2 things have changed since 1979. At the point that article was written, none of those things existed.
I want to give some pushback from a perspective of listening to young adults who don't think that we've gone far enough in terms of making sure our leadership is diverse. What would you say to that? And I'm going to ask that to any of our union presidents.
It's a good question, Pastor Hoy. And I think the young adults definitely bring an element of understanding of mission and perspective, and that needs to be heard. I had to dig deeper and ask, why do you see that? Because in the 44 years I've served in the church, I have seen a vast change. It may not be fast enough, but I can tell you that as Elder Edmonds has pointed out, there has been some significant change that has taken place. I think maybe it's engagement of young adults and saying, how do you want to be a part of the mission, and how can we help you experience the mission? And if you feel that there is, either in your church or your conference or wherever you are, that there's some lid, there's some glass ceiling that you can't get through because it is a race issue, let's bring it to the table. Let's talk it through. Let's try to understand each other.
All right, thank you so much. This is going to be another question from the audience, and this goes back to what you said, Elder Craig. You mentioned about one of the problems in our church is mediocrity. And so Shirley Lake King asked the question. She first says, thanks for sharing this very enlightening information with respect to the organizational structure of the church. What is the process that is utilized to assess the effectiveness of each layer of the structure, as well as the distribution of the tithe? So she wants to know first, what is the process that's utilized to assess the effectiveness? And we'll just start with unions. What do you do to assess the effectiveness of union? And then she asks the distribution of the tithe.
And I need a good answer, because Shirley Lake King was a member in my very first church. So I need a good answer.
One of the when I assumed the responsibility as union president a decade ago, this month is a decade ago, I inherited, and this is no shade I'm throwing on any predecessor, because my predecessor was extraordinarily awesome. But what I inherited was an evaluation process for all union employees that took place once every 5 years, just before the session. And one of the things that I sought to put in place was an annual evaluation process, a redefinition of the evaluation instrument to be more comprehensive, to be more addressing of deficits. We have more of a commitment to discipline, to staff development, and I believe that this is where it begins. We need a robust evaluative process, a strong evaluation tool, and we need to be as regular and as incessant as humanly possible so that we can help our employees to succeed. I believe that's where it begins.
Well, I'll speak up to just a moment of silence here. I think that you, Dr. Smith is on the same wavelength that we have used for years, and I've completed 15 years as a union president, and we have routinely done the performance evaluations on the field. Most of that deals with leadership. When you deal with assessment effectiveness of an organization, Those things are measured by your growth, measured by what's happening in the churches across the conferences, and that's continually looked at and evaluated by the conference executive committee, in our case, a union executive committee. And when it comes to our is so many prongs to what we do. Like, for example, we have right now a healthcare institution that is trying to win the Malcolm Baldrige Award. Malcolm Baldrige is one of the most prestigious awards that you have for businesses and corporations. And the only way they can get there is that they are effective, that they're highly effective. When it comes also to the use of tithe, those are looked at on a routine basis. We look at it every year, annually, with our union executive committee to see how those dollars are being spent. And we have about 50 people in the room that look at those disbursement of funds. Of course, the bigger picture is set by General Conference, Executive Committee, that deals with how much percent of tithe stays with the different entities.
Okay, I apologize for that moment of silence. I'm sorry. I was just so awed by that question by my former member, Shirley Lay King. She was a teenager in my very first church and has grown up to be a wonderfully successful adult. All right, here is the question. I've been waiting all day to get to this one. Decisions regarding the ordination of ministers are entrusted to the union conference. Two questions. And I'm gonna ask all three of you. Question one, have you surveyed your constituents? Now, obviously, this probably has less relevance to you, Dr. Weigley, because you all are already doing it. But have you surveyed the constituents in your union about their stance on the ordination of women, and what is your personal stance? And I'll ask the two the die has been cast in Columbia Union. So let me put my good friend Dr. Smith, who's part of our largest union. I hate to do this because we've been friends forever, but I got to put you on the spot, Dr. Smith.
That's okay. That's all right. And you were a part of the President's Council where we assumed our posture in relationship to ordination without respect to gender. And as respectful as I am of my esteemed colleague who is just retired in the Pacific Union, and my esteemed colleague, Dr. Weigley, even though he thinks he's smarter than I am, as much respect as I have for them, I just need to say we have assumed a posture. And let me ask the question first surrounding surveying our constituents. The answer to that would be I have not, through the union enterprise, directly surveyed our constituents. However, I do chair a college of presidents, 3 university presidents, and 8 conference presidents, and 2 healthcare delivery executives. That makes up my president's council. And we've been on this, and obviously they report to me the tenor and the direction of their constituency. And I embrace that. We develop a posture and a statement. The statement looked like this: we will develop, we will include, we will empower, we will facilitate the engagement of all who desire to do ministry. And we emphasized women as well. And we will do that. We will celebrate the giftedness, the inclusion, the participation, but we will do so only in harmony with the direction of the world church. And here's why we say that. And Elder Edmond, you are aware of this as well, as a former member of our President's Council. We believe that there were 2 concurrent conversations. One conversation has to do with fairness and social justice and inclusion. That's one. The other segment of the conversation has to do with polity, how one level of the organization interfaces and works synergistically with the other. And both conversations are very critical when we think about the onward and the upward and the mature functionality of the organization. And because those 2 conversations are critical, social justice, fairness, inclusion, that's one, and polity, that's the other. Because both pieces of the conversation are critical, we have to reckon with both. I have seized the opportunity surrounding, in response to your last question, what is my posture? Some of you may have long memories or short ministries, or maybe you're impervious to what I have done over the last year. One of the fringe benefits of being a union executive is I have the opportunity at critical meetings, every meeting in the church virtually that's important, to speak truth to power. And I usually was the second or the first or the second person to the microphone at every annual council when critical issues surrounding ordination, surrounding governance ensued. I was the one there speaking on behalf of my constituency, on behalf of my personal conviction. That is, the rocks will cry out if we don't get the work done. Certainly, I believe God can use men, women, young people, old people. If need be, as I said earlier, he will use cats and dogs and pets in order to finish the everlasting gospel's proclamation. So I certainly embrace the ordination of all who are willing to execute the gospel commission. But I have to do so in harmony with the objective of our constituency, and that is we will honor the two conversations, the conversation on justice and the conversation on politics.
Okay, Elder Craig. Same questions. One, have you surveyed your constituency? Two, what is your position?
Well, we did a survey about 2 years ago in the Texas conference because we needed to find out where the lay of the land on this issue, and we found out that about 20% of the conference church leaders were in favor of women's ordination. 80% were against. But when you ask the second question, how many would accept a female pastor, that jumped up to about 60%. So you can see the huge gulf there between accepting a female as a pastor and accepting women's ordination. Now, I think that it's so important for us as a church to ask ourselves a couple of questions in regard to this. Number one is, why do we, in good faith, allow females to go all the way through the educational system and get their doctorates and accept their money and not ordain them to ministry? To me, that's a huge lack of integrity on the part of us as a church. You can't have it both ways. The other thing is, how can we accept a female prophetess and give her that status and not ordain women in the church? You seem to be talking out of both sides of your mouth on that one as well. If you ask me what my position is, now I never take this up in any church or anything because this is so divisive that anything you say can be used as a lightning rod. So I never discuss this in churches or schools or things like that. But if you ask me personally, if you and I are talking, you ask me, I believe in women's ordination because I am in the church today because of two very strong women. One was my mother and the other is my wife. If it weren't for those two women who ministered to me, I would not be sitting here with you today without a doubt. And so can God use women to move the gospel forward? He certainly can. And I pray for the day when we recognize that. But at the same time, we can't spend time fighting over it because we're all slowing each other down in the process.
Okay, now, Dr. Weigley, your position is obviously clear, but I do have to ask you, how would you respond to those who say you kind of went ahead of the church?
No, we didn't. That's back to the whole reason why you have unions. Why do we have unions? In the policy book, even the NAD, a General Conference policy book, will tell you every level of the church has authority. Local church decides who are members. Ron and I, or Craig, Elder Craig, we can't go down to the local church or go up to the local church, I should say, and say, you can't have this person be your member. No, the local church says, sorry, it's our decision who's a member. Secondly, the conference decides who the pastors are and where churches are planted and how churches are organized. Their authority, you don't tell a conference, you can't have that church. That's their authority. Final. The unions always have had the responsibility for ordination. And let me tell you a little story, and I honor Elder Bradford for this. Elder Bradford, I called him in 2012 before our session, and I heard he was going to be able to come. He said, Dave, I can't come. Let me tell you something. He told me three things. I'll tell you one of them. His old sermon used to say that God breathes on he and breathes on she. He says, they just wait until the women get in the church and you get them, let them have the ministry, let them give them ministry. We will take off. We will take off. But Gary Patterson also told me this story. This gets to the authority of the union in ordination, Elder Edmonds. 1989, when Gary Patterson was assistant to the president for North American Division, he was Charles Bradford's assistant to the president. Elder Neil Wilson called a meeting at the old General Conference building in 1989 and said, listen, brethren, a number of people were there, I'm going to take the question of women's ordination to the world field, which would have been Indianapolis, 1990, to which Elder Bradford said, no, this is not a conversation for the world church. And then he gave reasons why he said it shouldn't be, but he simply made the point. This is not a decision. It is union to decide who gets ordained. The world church decides church manual, they decide the bylaws, but they don't decide how you express mission. And that's why in Russia, you stand for prayer. In Korea, you take your shoes off to go into the temple and pray. In Africa, you're allowed to baptize chiefs who have multiple women, polygamy, because you don't want to send those women off away from the chief, because what happens to those dear ladies when the chief no longer owns them? They have no future. So every culture has a little niche to it. Every culture needs to express the mission in their culture. And so it is the union that decides. No, I didn't get ahead of the church. I will simply tell you this, and I've told this to the brethren. You usurp this conversation. It doesn't belong at the General Conference World Headquarters. It doesn't belong at the World Church. It belongs at each local union. We are not Roman Catholic. We are Catholic, but the mission expressed by the union. And the union was set up to protect the mission and not to allow heavy-handedness from higher authority. I could go on and on and on. I live in this world. Listen, brethren, this conversation of women's ordination today is not because we're talking about women's ordination. E60 policy is what drove this, and what Elder Craig just said a moment ago. How do you let a woman, encourage a woman to go through all the steps of education? She goes out, she pastors churches, she gets a large church. Finally, the brethren say, she ought to be a conference president. Oh, no, she can't be a conference president. Why? She's not ordained. That's the E60 policy. Only ordained shall be conference presidents. And that was the issue in 2011 that tripped everything up. Well, we went to the North American Division, went to GC and said, let us have a variance in our policy. We voted in 2009. Let us go ahead and have the variance that we allow women to be conference presidents. We saw something happening in Southeastern California, which, by the way, did happen, didn't it? With Sandy Roberts becoming the president. And on and on and on. And no, the brethren in 2011 said, no, you cannot allow that variance. And so what happened? It tripped everything in NAD. And that's when Pacific Union, Columbia Union, and Mid-America Union, and then they pulled back. They all said, hey, listen, this is not right. These women need to be allowed to be a conference president if they're chosen. And that's when we said, okay, well, if ordination is the ceiling, the glass ceiling, then we need to step up and ordain women. And that's what we've done. And, I will say this, Elder Edmonds, that I believe the future is with this, because the church is exploding with dedicated women who are taking the gospel and preaching it just as well as any male. Praise God for them. And I'm thankful. And I am honored to sit here with two women and one a pastor. Thank you, Pastor Hoy, for your ministry.
Powerful answer.
Okay, so this question I will pose to all of you. What, if anything, would you like to change about the church organization of unions? Is there anything that you would like to change specifically about the organization? And whoever would like to go first?
The pandemic has already helped me. I don't travel as much. I can Zoom.
If I could contribute to Dr. Weigley's response on his last answer, I like the organization to be an agent of change to allow unions to fulfill their responsibility and to execute their latitude to do what they need to do. I think that environment would foster greater growth in our church.
Thank you.
I think she was waiting for you. I think she was waiting for you, Dr. Craig.
Well, I'm not a doctor, but I would concur with what my two colleagues said there. Those two things are very, very powerful changes that could be effectuated. I'm still early in the process, as I mentioned, but one of the things I would love to see is for the union conferences to be able to facilitate leadership growth within the church. I'm not trying to take away what Andrews does, what Oakwood does, what Loma Linda does. Those are all worthy institutions that do a great amount of academic preparation for the leaders in the church. But if the unions could take the lead in preparing leaders, because those who are at the union level are battle tested in the work of God. And if we could set up cohorts of leadership where leaders could be prepared to take up leadership positions in the church. I haven't talked to my two colleagues here yet, Dr. Weigley and Dr. Smith, but I will be calling them to ask if they will help with the Southwestern Union Institute of Leadership that we hope to kick off in 2022. And to be able to prepare young women and young men to be leaders in the church so that we're not groping for leaders when that position comes open, that we have people who are well qualified to do that. I love to see the union take up that spot.
Can I jump in here? Elder Craig, we're with you. If we can help in any way, we have some great programs, initiatives, and I just sat with a woman leader. Her name is Celeste Ryan Blyden, who wants to help us with that very item about leadership development and helping develop training materials. I want to answer your question because you pose it very, very specific. What do you want the organization to change about the unions? And I will simply say is live the 1901 mandate given to us by the servant of the Lord. Let unions do their work and do not have divisions trying to tell the unions how to do their work. I mean, I think that in the General Conference, you have a system that is not following the 1901 model, and that was release the unions and let them be about the mission. And I think, okay, it's women's ordination. No, it's not just that. It's a number of things. We need to not be pigeonholed into believing that, that program. No, every union develops their own, and they encourage local churches, of course, to develop their own in a way that moves the mission forward.
Yes, sir. Of course.
They're calling me now for my assignment. I have to do an address now. And if I could slip out, thank you for the honor of being a part of this panel.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Thank you for being with us, Dr. Smith.
Elder Craig, I think they're prophesying over your life. So I guess you're about to enroll in some higher education institution.
Well, I want to ask, first of all, thank you all for your responses to our questions. And I want to thank our audience, our ORCM family that's with us today watching, but also asking questions. And these are great questions. So if you have more, please send more. This question is coming from DeWitt Goulburn. And his question says, union presidents are automatically members of the GC AdCom. Please share the power that AdCom has in setting the agenda of the world church and how union presidents play a role.
Can I help with that? Just a little clarification. I think what DeWitt might mean is the General Conference Executive Committee. The union presidents are not part of AdCom. AdCom is an in-house committee that is led by the General Conference president, and then he has there his cabinet that sits on AdCom. And we can submit ideas for an agenda item to be placed on the agenda of the General Conference, but it's up to them to decide if it gets. The division would be the one that would propose it. In fact, we've done some things because of the most recent action to have a General Conference that could be virtual. that we are suggesting some things. Okay, if it's virtual, then let's make sure we can be diverse, because there were some restrictions there. So we're past that. The divisions to pass that to the general conference, and they are the ones that would approve that. But we have no authority over the agenda. There used to be, Pastor Hoy, something very fascinating called the General Conference Division Officer Meeting, GCDO. And those were division presidents, the secretary of the general conference president, of course, and his executive officers. They would all sit in a room and they would approve the agenda for an annual council. And that is no longer an agenda approving body. They simply work as an advisory to the president, and his AdCom actually sets the agenda now. That's changed in the last 2 years.
Thank you. Elder Craig, would you like to add to that in any?
Yeah, I think I'm probably pretty too new to be able to offer an opinion on that. But I think I've learned a lot listening to my two colleagues here about some of the structure and how things work. And but yeah, people I think generally confuse AdCom with the General Conference Executive Committee, and that's a pretty small circle at AdCom that determines what the agenda items will be going forward toward the executive committee. But I have learned that for the most part, one of the things I did want to say was, for the most part, our sister entities, whether it be the division or the general conference, they are pretty open to listening to suggestions and recommendations and observations, more open than the average member would realize. You would think that there's a stymieing of communication, but my personal observation has been that for the most part, that it's pretty open when you want to make an observation and get a point across.
Thank you. This question comes from Ishmael Wade. He says, when it comes to ministry departments, what unique benefit does union ministry departments provide that differ from conference level and division level departments?
We've minimized. We used to have 50 people in our office building. We have about 30 now. We've minimized a lot of our departments. We simply support a lot of the conferences. But what we do, the education department, the accrediting bodies, we need to have those people in there to support our school systems. We have our youth. We don't have a youth. We have a person who has a multiple number of things he carries: youth, community services, pathfinders. But we work together with the local conferences in creating initiatives and plans together. But we tried not to duplicate. We've tried not to do that, except where we just need, like an education. But we've reduced a whole lot. We don't personal ministry Sabbath school. We don't have any of that. We don't duplicate.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer from Dr. Weigley, because as a former conference president at the conference level, you often feel like the union is duplicating what you're doing, and sometimes running interference with what you're doing. And so when I got this assignment, I let my colleagues know at the union there that we were going to go about being very intentional about not duplicating what the conferences were doing, but even downsizing. Right now, we're looking at downsizing a little bit at the union office, because we appear to have a little bit of overstaffing in some areas. And when you overstaff, people bump into each other and run over each other. So we are, like Dr. Weigley said, we are more interested in supporting the conferences and their ministry and their vision than providing ministries out of the blue that will often crash and collide with the local conference.
Okay, we are down to 1 minute. So I got to have real quick answers from both of you, real quick. What would happen to the Seventh-day Adventist Church structure and mission if unions went away?
We become Roman Catholic instead of just Catholic. We become too hierarchical. Unions are there to guard mission. They're guardians of mission. That would be my response.
Okay. All right. Elder Craig, that was real succinct. You got anything to add to that?
I would just say I concur with that answer.
Yeah. He did nail that one, didn't he? All right. We have come to the end of our time. Thank you so much. I will thank in absentia my good friend, Dr. Smith. And I'll thank you two gentlemen, Dr. Weigley and Elder Craig. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that this has been, I learned some things. as well. So thank you for sharing. And let's talk about the next part of our series on church structure.
Thank you so much again for our guests. We also want to thank our audience. We want to thank our streaming partner, the awesome, the wonderful man of God, the tech genius, Elder Barone Savori, for helping us with our streaming today. We want to share what's coming up with the Office for Regional Conference Ministry and our conferences that are coming up. And so we have a couple of events coming up. The first one is our Northwest Pacific Union. They are having, and I'm going to ask if we could put that flyer there, the Crosswalk in the City Urban Ministries Convention, 16th through the 18th, coming up very soon. You can check out our Facebook page under events, and you'll see where to register, or you can go to the Northwest Pacific Union Regional Ministries or African American Ministries website to find more information. Our next event coming up is our Conscience and Justice Council convention. It is virtual this year. That's going to take place September the 24th through the 25th. The topic is hate and liberty, statements, conversations, or actions. Save the date. You can go and register on Eventbrite. You can again access that from the Office for Regional Conference Ministries Facebook page, our website, and also from the Conscience and Justice Council Facebook page and website as well. Third event that is coming up, Southwest Region Convocation. This is both virtual and in person. That's taking place October 16th. The man of God, Elder Carlton Bird, will be preaching. Their guest musicians, and it's just going to be a powerful event. And we invite you to go to the Southwest Region Conference website and Facebook page. You can get more information there, as well as on the Office for Regional Conference Ministries website and social media sites. The final event we want to talk about is our Pastors Evangelism and Leadership Conference, or PELC, happening December 5th through the 8th. It is both in person and online, and we invite you to go ahead and register. The early bird is gone, but you can still get a great rate for PELC. Some very heavy-hitting preachers. One of those preachers looks very familiar, Elder Edmond. But we have some mighty men and women of God. My sister Michelle Mota is preaching, and we just have some awesome speakers. Not only is it about preaching, but it's about equipping pastors and elders for ministry. So we invite you to be a part of PELC. Finally, our next first Sabbath series will feature divisions. So we've talked about conferences, we've talked about unions, and now we are talking about divisions. And we are just so excited to have on October 2nd, our NAD president, Dr. G. Alexander Bryant, will be with us for our first Sabbath series. We'll have that information on our Facebook page as well as on our website, and you can check it out there. As we close out today, I just want to do kind of a wellness check and say to our ORCM family, as you're viewing, we've had a lot of deaths. This is also the 20th anniversary of September 11 terrorist attacks. And we just want you to know that there's support for you here. If you need someone to reach out and touch and talk with you, please just share that with us in the comments. Let us know how we can serve you. And we are just, again, at the beginning of the message of the show, we talked about the life and the service of Elder Charles Bradford. Just thankful for his life and his service. We also have just lost people like Elder Helvius Thompson, Elder and Mrs. Fordham, Mrs. Carol Wright. We're just thankful for those servants who serve God. And we just pray for their families as they grieve and mourn their lives. Elder Newton Cleghorn, and there are others. But we just want to ask you to keep those families in prayer. let's just make sure we support ourselves in this time of a pandemic and be there for one another. To close, I'm going to ask if Miss Rebekah Bell Jackson will come and give us a closing prayer.
Of course. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes. Dear loving Lord and Father, we thank you so much to have the opportunity to learn about the structure of your church. We pray that not only will we be informed, but we will be eager to serve you and to carry out the mission, which is to draw all men unto you and women. Thank you so much for your love. Save us when you return. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.